Okay, before we get started with the Azure function development, let's go through the prerequisites. Don't worry if you don't have some of these tools installed. I leave links to all of these in the description. So the first thing we're going to need is an Azure account, obviously. Then we're going to need to install the Azure CLI. This is basically a command line tool that will allow us to interact with our Azure account. Then we need to install Azure Functions core tools. This is another CLI tool, but this one's created specifically to interact with Azure Functions. We will basically be using this tool to create, run, and deploy our functions. The most important thing of this tool is that it allows us to run our functions locally, so we can run everything locally, test it, debug it, and then deploy it to the cloud. Next, we're going to need our Python virtual environment. We're going to be using Python 3.11 in this case, because that's the highest version of Python supported by Azure Functions at the recording of this video. So any Python 3.11 will be fine. I'll be using 3.11.6 personally. And the last thing we're going to need, this is really an optional, it's not really something we need, but it's the VS Code Azure Functions extension. So there's a whole extension for Azure in VS Code. I don't like it that much, I don't use it that much, but it has a nice UI to check some things sometimes. So let's go through them one by one here. So let's start checking our Python version. As you can see here, I'm using Python 3.11.6, but again, any Python 3.11 version should do just fine. Next, we're going to check our Azure CLI tool, which again allows us to interact with our Azure account. Here I can see that I have it installed, and let's see, for example, some account details. For example, here we can see like the subscription name, maybe some IDs, which I'm blurring out partially, and a few other account details. Now let's move on to the Azure Functions core tools, whose command name is func. So first, again, I'll check that I have it installed, and I do. And now let's display the help menu, or the help documentation. Here we're going to see the different subcommands available, and specifically we're going to be interested in this init and start subcommands. These are the ones we're going to be using later. Lastly, we have the Azure extension for VS Code. Again, I don't use it that much, but it's a nice UI. Here I have my different subscriptions, the one I use for learning, the one I use personally for other projects. And here in this workspace, I can create functions and deploy them locally. So it gives us some functionality. Again, I don't really use it. I don't really like it that much, but I might use it eventually for debugging.